The ice inside me is hungry, and today it wants to swallow my sanity whole. Have you ever felt a cold so deep it stops your breath? That is my life every single day. I stepped out of my royal carriage, and, in that moment, the lush green grass of the Evermoon Pack lands turned into black ice under my heavy boots. The life in the soil died instantly. Because of that, I had to clench my fists inside my leather gloves to hide the terrible shaking. The frost was moving up my arms like freezing needles. I hide the frost. I hide the pain. I hide the monster. If the other alphas see my weakness, my kingdom will fall into total chaos. Without warning, a sharp biting pain cut through my chest. I stopped by a small puddle of water on the trail and looked down at my reflection. The jagged scar over my left eyebrow looked stark and white against my pale skin. My silver eyes were starting to cloud over with thin, foggy layers of ice. It reminded me so much of my father. I still remember the terrible day the curse took him completely. He turned into a solid, silent statue of ice right before my eyes, and then he just shattered into 1,000 pieces on the stone floor. I will not let that happen to me. In that moment, I swore I would die a fighting king, not a frozen monster. What's worse, the terrifying numbness was creeping into my thoughts. I couldn't feel happiness anymore, and even my anger was becoming a distant memory. I needed to sign this peace treaty quickly because my own blood was turning into jagged glass. The Evermoon Pack lands smelled like wet dirt and warm pine trees, a heavy scent that made my inner wolf snap his jaws in absolute disgust. We did not belong here in this suffocating warmth. Still, I forced myself to walk toward the grand meeting hall because the Evermoon Alpha cannot know my true weakness. Soon after, my royal guards surrounded me like a solid wall of iron shields. They could easily smell the winter rolling off my skin in heavy waves. I could hear the pack members whispering about the terrifying Ice King who never smiles. Let them whisper. Fear is a very useful shield when your body is failing you completely. Yet, a strange dark voice echoed in the back of my mind, whispering an ancient warning I couldn't fully understand. It was an open secret that the curse had a cure, but the knowledge was lost long ago. Why was the frost screaming inside me today? I didn't know. I pulled my fur cloak tighter around my shoulders. Every breath I took came out as a thick cloud of white vapor. The air around me grew heavy and thick. I could feel the eyes of 100 wolves on me, judging my every step. They thought I came to conquer them, but I was just trying to survive the winter in my own veins. But the true danger wasn't the frost outside. It was the smiling snake waiting for me inside the council room. Chapter 2. Next. I entered the grand council chamber where the air was thick with the suffocating scent of old parchment and burning tallow candles. Regent Magnus Dreadmore sat at the head of the long wooden table, his face twisted into a perfect fake smile. He looked so safe and gentle to the untrained eye. In fact, I remembered how he used to give me beautifully carved wooden toys to play with when I was just an orphaned boy, right before he slowly took over the legal control of my entire court. He speaks of peace, he speaks of treaties, he speaks of lies. I knew his true, ugly nature deep down. He wanted my royal crown more than his next breath. Your Majesty, Magnus murmured, his smooth voice dripping with false respect as he gestured to the map spread across the table. The Evermoon Alpha wants us to give up our northern hunting borders. I think we should refuse and take their fertile lands by force. I stared at him with my freezing silver eyes, completely refusing to show a single spark of emotion. To make things worse, the sharp ice inside my chest tightened painfully, making it incredibly hard to draw a clear breath. I couldn't let him see me struggle for even a second. I rejected his violent plan immediately because a bloody war would only accelerate the curse inside my veins, leaving my innocent people completely helpless against his endless greed. Moments later, Magnus leaned back in his leather chair, his dark eyes narrowing like a wild predator, assessing its injured prey. He asked me a bold question that made my cursed blood run even colder. How much longer can you truly hold the winter back, Orion? It was a direct, dangerous challenge to my royal authority. He definitely knew about the secret prophecy of the king's salvation, but he had hidden the ancient texts from me for years. What did he do to the magical bloodlines of the past to ensure I stayed cursed? The dark question hung in the air like heavy smoke. Still, I kept my voice perfectly calm and steady, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break under pressure. Instead, I slammed my hand hard on the parchment treaty, leaving a thin, crackling layer of white frost over the fresh black ink. We signed the peace agreement today, Magnus, and not a single moment later, I growled, my voice sounding like grinding glaciers in the dead of winter. He nodded slowly, but the dark glint in his eyes told me he was already planning his next treasonous move. He was a master of whispers, and I knew he had hidden spies in every corner of my cold citadel. I stood up, my heavy fur cloak sweeping against the floor. The wooden chairs around the table groaned under the sudden drop in temperature. Magnus didn't even flinch, which only proved how used to my magic he had become over the years. I needed a desperate distraction from the plotting regent, and the sudden, loud drums of the pack's mating ceremony outside offered the perfect escape. Chapter 3. That night I stood alone on the high stone balcony overlooking the crowded ceremonial grounds of the Evermoon pack. The evening air was alive with the crackling heat of blazing torches and the wild, primal energy of fated mates finding each other under the full moon. I watched a young, beautiful woman named Nyla Evermoon step into the center of the sacred ring. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop her small hands from shaking against her simple dress. She looks at her fated mate. She looks at the judgmental crowd. She looks at her own sudden ruin. Her presumed mate, an arrogant warrior named Jace Whitlock, stood before her with a cruel, mocking sneer plastered across his face. I, Jace Whitlock, reject you, Nyla Evermoon, as my fated mate. His loud, booming voice echoed across the completely silent courtyard. Her voice trembled as she tried to defend herself, but the cruel, mocking laughter of the pack drowned her out completely because her mother's mysterious, magical past made her an automatic outcast. They loudly called her a total disgrace. Before she could move, Jace pushed her roughly to the hard ground, leaving her sobbing alone in the dirt. My inner wolf roared in pure feral fury inside my mind, a sudden violent reaction that shocked me to my absolute core. Why did this stranger's public pain touch my frozen soul so deeply? I couldn't answer that. The moment their eyes locked, mine and Nyla's across the crowded courtyard, something absolutely terrifying happened to my body. A latent, invisible spark of her hidden magic flared across the great distance, hitting me straight in my frozen chest. And just like that, everything changed. A massive wave of pure golden heat rushed violently through my frozen veins, melting the thick ice around my heart for the very first time in centuries. It was an agonizing, beautiful sensation that made me gasp out loud. I gasped for air, because the beautiful heat in her blood was the only thing that could save my dying soul from the eternal winter. I knew right then and there that I could never let her face a brutal exile. Without another word, I leaped directly from the high balcony, landing heavily on the dark dirt right between Nyla and the completely shocked pack leaders. The ground froze instantly into white ice beneath my boots, but my silver eyes were fixed entirely on her trembling form. I reached down and gently lifted her up from the dirt, my cold hand gripping hers tightly. "She is coming with me to the winter court as my guest," I announced, my powerful voice completely silencing the entire pack. She looked up at me, her wide eyes filled with a mixture of shock and wonder. I could feel her warmth radiating against my cold skin, fighting back the frost that tried to claim my fingers. Magnus watched us leave from the shadows, his fists clenched tight at his sides. My frozen heart was finally beating again, but as we walked toward my carriage, I knew the real battle to keep her alive had just begun. Chapter 4. The heavy leather carriage doors slammed shut, and just like that, everything changed. The small space inside filled up completely with the sweet scent of wild honey and fresh rain coming off Nyla's skin. Because of that, My inner wolf was scratching hard at my ribs, desperate to break out. Have you ever had to sit inches away from the one person who could save your life, knowing your very touch might kill them? Truth be told, it was the hardest test of my entire life. Nyla curled up tightly into the corner of the velvet seat, her small body shaking from the bitter cold rolling off my skin. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop her teeth from clicking together in the quiet carriage. I wanted to pull her close. I wanted to wrap her in my heavy blankets. I wanted to erase every single tear she cried back in the dirt. Instead, I sat perfectly still like a block of granite because my very touch might kill her. Soon after, the carriage jolted forward onto the rocky road heading north. I kept my eyes fixed on the window, but I was actually watching her reflection in the dark glass. As the silence stretched, I noticed a strange rusted iron key hanging around her neck on a simple leather string. It had weird dragon shapes carved into the old metal. My heart skipped a beat when I saw it. That key looked exactly like the ancient drawing in my father's secret diary, the key that opens the forbidden lower vaults of my own castle. Why did a disgraced girl from a weak forest pack have a royal key from the Winter Kingdom? I opened my mouth to ask her about it, but before the words left her lips, she looked up and caught me staring. "Why did you save me, Alpha King?" Nyla whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf in a storm. "Everyone back home says I am broken. They say my mother's magic was evil." Beneath the moonlight, streaming through the carriage window, her green eyes looked so bright and real. In that moment, I felt a sharp line of heat slice through my freezing chest because her presence was doing something impossible to my magic. "You are not broken, Nyla," I said, keeping my voice deep and flat so she wouldn't hear my heart pounding. "You are coming to my kingdom because you need a safe place to sleep, and I need to know why your magic alters my frost." Without another word, she looked down at her hands, touching the old iron key around her neck. She told me a quick story about how her mother gave her that key right before faceless men in black cloaks dragged her away into the woods. The mystery grew deeper inside my mind. As the sky darkened, outside, the temperature inside the carriage dropped even lower, and I knew we were finally entering the deadly borders of the Ice Kingdom. Chapter 5. From there, we finally arrived at the main gates of the Frostbane Citadel. The massive fortress was carved out of solid blue ice and dark, jagged stone that reached up into the freezing clouds like sharp teeth. At the same time, my royal guards lined up in the snow, bowing their heads as I pulled Nyla out of the carriage. Her boots sank deep into the white drifts, and, without thinking, she reached out and grabbed my forearm for balance. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a bright flash of golden light shot through my leather sleeve. I pulled my arm away instantly, my silver eyes flashing with pure panic. "Would you risk your own heart to save a stranger who belongs to another world?" In fact, I remembered a terrible story about my own father from when I was just a little boy. The curse had just started freezing his hands, and one night he tried to hug my mother to stay warm, but his magic slipped, and he froze her fingers into solid ice. He locked himself away in a dark room forever after that day. Because of that, I looked down at Nyla with a harsh, angry expression to hide my deep fear. "You must learn the rules of this castle immediately," I growled, making my voice sound as cold as the wind. "You will not speak to the guards, you will not wander the dark halls, and you will never, ever touch me." Despite that, Nyla didn't shrink away from my angry words like the other wolves usually did. Rather, she stood tall in the deep snow, her chest heaving as she looked right into my eyes. "I am not afraid of your cold, Orion," she said clearly. The tension broke between us when a loud, dark laugh echoed from the top of the stone stairs. Regent Magnus stood there, wrapped in a thick black cloak, watching us with a very strange smile on his face. More importantly, his eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed entirely on the rusted iron key hanging around Nyla's neck. "Welcome home, Your Majesty," Magnus murmured as he walked down the steps toward us. I see you brought a little stray from the woods. My spies tell me her mother was a very dangerous witch. Before either could speak, I stepped directly in front of Nyla, blocking her completely from his creepy stare. I told the headmaid to take Nyla to a bedroom in the highest tower, far away from my own quarters because my dark kingdom was a dangerous place for a fragile wolf. Magnus watched her walk away, and I could feel the cold frost in my veins turning into a sharp, dangerous shield. Chapter 6. That night, the darkness in my royal bedroom felt like a living monster. The frost was moving incredibly fast, covering my stone walls in thick, jagged sheets of white ice. Without warning, a terrible night terror gripped my mind, showing me images of my kingdom turning into a giant, silent graveyard of frozen statues. I saw Nyla standing in the middle of the blizzard, screaming my name as the ice swallowed her whole. What would you do if your own body became your worst enemy? To make things worse, I woke up gasping for air, and my magic exploded out of my body in a wild, blind panic. Moments later, my bedroom window shattered into pieces, my bed sheets turned to white frost, and my breath stopped completely in my throat. I couldn't control the freezing energy anymore. The curse was winning. But then, a strange sound caught my attention from the courtyard down below. I forced my stiff, heavy legs to walk across the frozen floor toward the broken window. Under the weight of his stare, or rather, the feeling of someone watching me, I looked down into the dark garden. A large black crow with glowing red eyes was sitting on Magnus's balcony across the yard, whispering something in a creepy human voice that I couldn't quite hear. By the time I looked away from the bird, I saw a bright, beautiful glow near the frozen fountain. Nyla was standing out in the snow, wearing only a thin white nightgown. As her wolf stirred, inside her, a beautiful aura of pure golden magic flared out from her body like a warm summer sun. As if pulled by a string, the thick sheets of ice on my bedroom walls began to melt, turning into soft streams of clear water. The agonizing pain in my chest stopped instantly because her golden aura was the only shield against my spreading winter. Eventually, I leaned against the stone window frame, my silver eyes fixed on her peaceful face as she walked through the snow. She didn't know she was saving my life from across the castle yard. Deep down, she knew the truth, that we were connected, even if I was too terrified to admit it out loud. Why was her magic tied so perfectly to my ancient curse? I looked back over at Magnus's balcony, but the red-eyed crow was gone, leaving only a dark shadow behind. I knew the regent was planning something terrible for the coming morning, and I had to protect my beautiful savior at all costs. Chapter 7. Come morning, I stood completely still behind the frozen glass window of my high study, watching Nyla walk through the dead gardens down below. The world down there was a wasteland of white snow and sharp icicles. Despite that, she walked like she belonged in a beautiful summer forest. The loud crunch of her boots on the hard crust of snow echoed up to my ears. In that moment, she stopped near the ancient frost vines that had been dead for ages. She reached out her bare, pale hand. Without thinking, she touched the jagged ice covering the dark bark. And just like that, everything changed. A soft, golden light flared from her fingertips, glowing bright against the white snow. As if pulled by a string, the thick sheets of ice began to crack and melt into tiny clear water drops. I watched in total shock as tiny green buds poked their heads through the frozen wood. Have you ever seen a flower bloom in a freezer? It shook me to my core because nothing has grown in this dead soil for 3 centuries. I pressed my heavy gloved hand against the window pane, leaving a smear of frost. With every heartbeat, my chest felt lighter, and the biting pain inside my ribs eased up just a little bit. I saw the green buds. I saw the melting ice. I saw my own hope. My inner wolf let out a quiet, happy whine because the sweet smell of fresh earth was drifting up through the cracks in the stone. It was a beautiful smell. I remembered my father's last days in this exact room. He used to stare out of this same window, crying heavy tears that turned to solid ice before they even hit his cheeks. He died completely alone because he refused to let anyone touch his hand. I did not want to die like him. I wanted to feel the sun again. I remembered an old bedtime story my nurse told me when I was a tiny cub. She said a golden light would one day come to melt the king's crown. I never believed her. I thought it was just a silly tale to make me sleep. Now, looking at the wet stone, my thoughts spun out of control. But then, a cold draft swept through the room, bringing a foul smell of sour wine and old dust. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Regent Magnus stepped out of the dark shadows near the doorway. "She is a dangerous parasite, Your Majesty," Magnus said, his smooth voice dripping with fake worry. "Look at the garden. The castle is unfreezing because her freakish magic is stealing your winter power." I turned around slowly, my heavy leather boots clicking loud against the floor. I clenched my fists because I could see the dark lies hiding behind his fake smile. He wanted me to throw her out into the wild. Why did he hate her magic so much? Deep down, she knew the truth, or rather, I knew the truth, that Magnus was terrified of what she could do to his plans. Under the weight of his stare, I kept my expression as cold as a glacier. "She stays here, Magnus," I growled, my voice rough and deep. "She is my guest and no one will touch her." Moments later, the regent bowed his head and backed out of the room, but his eyes were full of dark promises. I knew the court lords would try to break her spirit if they thought she was weak. Because of that, I made a sudden, risky plan to test her myself in front of the whole pack council. I needed to see if she could survive the brutal wolves of the winter court, even if it meant forcing her into the dangerous spotlight. I walked out of my study to find her, wondering if this girl would be my salvation or my ultimate destruction, as we walked straight toward the grand meeting hall. Chapter 8. Next, I pushed open the heavy oak doors and led Nyla into the loud council chamber. The room instantly fell into a dead, suffocating silence. A dozen old lords sat around the long table, their sharp eyes locking onto her like hungry hawks watching a rabbit. The air thickened, with their judgmental sense of old sweat and heavy furs. I took my place at the head of the table on my high ice throne, leaving Nyla to stand completely alone at the bottom of the room. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop her fingers from clutching the old iron key around her neck. It was the same key that opened the forbidden vaults, and seeing it gave me a strange feeling. Have you ever had to stand completely alone while a room full of monsters judged your very existence? "Why is this pack disgrace standing in our sacred hall?" Lord Thomas barked, slamming his fist down so hard the wooden table groaned. "She is an outcast. Her mother was a criminal." In the echo of his voice, the other lords started shouting and growling in agreement. They wanted her thrown. They wanted her broken. They wanted her gone. They screamed for her exile because they believed she carried a dark curse. Nyla stood perfectly still, but her voice trembled when she finally spoke up. "I am not a criminal," she said softly. Before the words left her lips, Lord Thomas laughed a cruel, booming laugh that cut right through her. My inner wolf went completely wild with primal rage. I couldn't sit there and watch them humiliate her like her old pack did. Without thinking, I unleashed my terrifying alpha aura into the room. A blast of freezing blue wind exploded from my body, coating the long table in a thick layer of crackling ice. The tension broke instantly as the lords choked for air, their faces turning pale with pure fear. "Silence," I growled, my voice shaking the very stones of the castle. "She is under my personal protection because I willed it. Speak against her again, and you will answer to my claws." In the stillness that followed, not a single lord dared to make a sound. They looked down at their frozen hands in shock. I dismissed the meeting with a sharp wave of my hand, because I couldn't breathe in that stuffy room anymore. Soon after, the lords scrambled out of the doors like scared mice. Nyla didn't run away, though. Instead, she walked straight up to my high throne, her green eyes blazing with a mix of anger and confusion. "Why did you do that?" she demanded, stepping dangerously close to my frozen seat. "You treat me like a prisoner one minute, and then you defend me the next. What do you really want from me, Orion?" The space between them burned with an intense, invisible heat that made my heart race. I looked at her beautiful, angry face, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. I wanted to tell her that her warmth was the only thing keeping me alive, but I was too proud and too scared to say it. I stood up and walked past her without a word, leaving her alone in the cold room, completely unaware of the deadly shadow waiting for her in the dark hallways outside. Chapter 9. That night I paced up and down the floor of my dark bedroom like a trapped beast. The scent of pine and wild honey was still stuck in my nose, making my wolf restless. Why couldn't I just ignore her? Truth be told, I was falling into a dangerous trap of my own making. Without warning, a sharp, agonizing scream pierced through the quiet castle walls. It was Nyla. Her body moved on instinct. Or rather, my body moved on instinct. I sprinted out of my room, my bare feet slamming against the cold stone floor as I followed the sound to the eastern hallway. Before she could move, a massive rogue wolf with scarred gray fur had pinned Nyla against the wall. He had a gleaming silver dagger clamped tightly in his jaws, aiming right for her throat. He was an assassin hired by Magnus because I could smell the Regent's signature poison on the blade. It smelled like bitter almonds and death. As if summoned, I lunged across the hallway, a complete blur of silver and fury. I tried to use my ice magic to freeze the attacker, but my wild, panicked emotions made my power misfire spectacularly. A wave of jagged ice missed the rogue entirely and shattered a nearby stone pillar instead. I had to fight him hand to hand. I grabbed the rogue wolf by his thick neck, slamming him hard against the floor. He snapped his jaws, grazing my cheek and drawing hot blood right over my old scar. I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of my own blood. I didn't care about the pain because pure, feral protection was running through my veins. I twisted his neck until he went completely limp, dropping the poisoned dagger to the floor with a loud clang. Moments later, the hallway fell completely silent again, except for my own heavy, ragged breathing. A single black crow feather lay in the pool of blood near the body, making my thoughts race back to the bird on Magnus's balcony. I turned around to check on Nyla, my heart pounding against my ribs like a wild drum. She was slumped against the wall, her white nightgown torn and stained with dark dust. While her pulse raced, I knelt down in front of her, my hands shaking as I checked her for wounds. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice sounding cracked and breathless. She shook her head slowly, but her body was trembling all over from the terrifying shock. Without thinking, I reached out to brush a stray lock of hair away from her face. The moment our eyes locked, my cold hand brushed against her warm cheek. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a massive wave of soothing golden warmth rushed straight up my arm and settled deep inside my chest. The heavy freezing ice around my heart receded farther than it ever had before. It felt so incredibly good I almost cried out loud. I closed my eyes, savoring the beautiful, solid feeling of her skin against mine. Have you ever been saved by the very thing you were trying to protect? As the silence roared in my ears, I realized something truly terrifying. I wanted her magic. I wanted her warmth. I wanted her. I pulled my hand back quickly because the realization scared me more than the curse itself. But as I looked down at the dead assassin, I knew Magnus would strike again very soon and I would have to risk everything to keep her safe. Chapter 10. The dead assassin's body was gone, but the heavy scent of poisoned almonds still hung in my nose. Because of that, I couldn't stay in the open halls any longer. I grabbed Nyla's small hand and pulled her down the spiral stone stairs. We went deeper and deeper into the belly of the castle where the air was thick with ancient dust. From there, we reached the forbidden royal archives. It was a tiny, cramped room filled with thousands of old, rotting books. The stone walls were dripping with black ice, making the small space feel like a freezing cage. Have you ever gone searching for answers in the dark, terrified of what you might actually find? With her scent in the air, my inner wolf started pacing inside my mind. The sweet smell of wild honey was trapped in this tight space with me, and it was driving me completely insane. What followed was a heavy, tense silence as we began pulling heavy leather books from the wooden shelves. I needed to find out the truth about her mother's magical bloodline. At the same time, I needed to know why her touch felt like hot fire against my frozen skin. Our shoulders brushed against each other because the aisles were so narrow. Every single time our skin neared, my heart skipped a beat. I could hear her soft breathing in the quiet room. Under the weight of her stare, I froze. She was looking right at the jagged scar over my left eyebrow with so much sadness in her eyes. It made me feel exposed. It made me feel weak. It made me feel small. I hate feeling weak. I remember an old story from my youth about a young warrior who let a human woman see his scars. She used that weakness to drive a silver blade right through his heart the next day. I would not make the same mistake. I had to keep my emotional walls up high. But then, Nyla pointed her finger at a giant dust-covered book on the very bottom shelf. The book had the royal frostbane seal carved into the heavy leather cover. As if pulled by a string, my hand reached out and grabbed the book, blowing a thick cloud of gray dust into the air. We flipped open the yellow pages, searching for the prophecy of the king's salvation. As the truth unraveled, before us, my silver eyes went completely wide. The pages detailing my family's curse were completely ruined. Someone had violently torn the most important page right out of the binding. What's worse, the tear was completely fresh. The jagged paper edges hadn't even gathered dust yet. Someone in this very castle was actively hiding the cure from me. I slammed the book shut with a loud, echoing thud. This realization didn't just make me angry. It filled me with a deep, primal dread, because the answers we needed were completely gone. The open loop of my family's dark secret was still dangling over my head. The air around us became so heavy we could barely breathe. I looked down at Nyla, and the pure terror in her green eyes told me she knew exactly who did this, bridging our fear directly into the freezing shadows of the next hour. Chapter 11. After that discovery in the dark archives, the biting cold inside my chest became absolutely unbearable. We walked back to my private study, but my legs were shaking so hard I could barely stand up. The frost was clawing its way up my throat, trying to choke the life out of me because my angry emotions were feeding the curse. I collapsed onto my knees right on the hard stone floor, groaning in pure agony. My breath came out in thick, white clouds. I couldn't see. I couldn't breathe. I was dying. In that moment, Nyla did something completely crazy. She didn't run away in fear. Instead, she dropped to her knees right in front of me and reached out her bare hands. Before the words left my lips, she placed both of her warm palms flat against my frozen chest. Time stood still. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a massive, blinding flash of golden light exploded between us. And just like that, everything changed. The thick, heavy ice that had been wrapping around my heart for 300 years suddenly began to melt away. It didn't just melt. It shattered. For the first time in centuries, my heart gave a massive, violent thud against my ribs. The physical pain stopped instantly, but what followed was something much more terrifying. A giant, roaring tidal wave of long-buried human emotions flooded straight into my brain. I felt everything all at once. I felt the crushing grief of losing my parents. I felt the deep, burning anger of Magnus's betrayal. I felt the heavy weight of my lonely life. More importantly, I felt a deep, consuming love for the girl standing right in front of me. It was total sensory overload. My thoughts spun out of control because my mind didn't know how to handle this much feeling. I looked at Nyla, and the moment our eyes locked, I saw my entire future in her beautiful green eyes. Have you ever been so terrified of a good feeling that you wanted to scream? I was a king who ruled through cold logic, a king who hid behind frozen walls, a king who was completely terrified of his own heart. I couldn't handle the raw, wild heat of these new emotions. It felt like my very identity was being burned to ashes. My chest ached with a sudden, violent weight. Without another word, a blind panic gripped my soul. I scrambled backward away from her warm touch, my silver eyes wide with terror. I let out a loud, feral roar as my wild magic exploded out of my hands. A massive, jagged wall of blue ice shot up from the floor, separating us completely. The thick frost rumbled like loud thunder. I couldn't look back at her because I was too scared of my own weakness. I ran out into the dark hallway, my heavy breathing echoing like a dying animal. The winter inside me was regaining total control. I needed to hide from the sun. I needed to hide from her beautiful face. I turned around and fled down the long stone corridor like a coward, leaving her alone behind the frozen barrier, completely unaware that my desperate retreat would lead me straight into a deadly royal trap of lies right now. Chapter 12. Next, I locked myself inside the dark, empty throne room, leaning my heavy back against the giant oak doors. My heart was still pounding like wild drums inside my chest, a loud and constant reminder of the warmth I had just fled. I was trembling all over. I couldn't think straight because the human feelings were still rushing through my veins like hot poison. To make things worse, the heavy wooden doors slowly creaked open behind me. Regent Magnus stepped into the room, his black boots clicking softly against the stone floor. He had a wicked, triumphant look in his dark eyes. He held up a strange, glowing purple crystal that smelled like dark magic and rotting flowers. "I warned you about that girl, Orion," Magnus murmured, his smooth voice echoing off the high stone walls. "Look at this crystal. My spies caught her performing a dark ritual in her room. Her golden magic isn't curing your curse. It is actually feeding it." As the truth unraveled, or rather as his beautiful lies filled the quiet air, my mind began to fracture with deep doubt. I looked at the purple crystal, and my old insecurities came roaring back to life. I remembered how my father always trusted the wrong people before he froze. Was I being fooled just like him? Was Nyla's warmth just a beautiful trick to destroy my kingdom? Because of that, my deep fear of destroying her won the battle inside my head. If her magic was dangerous, I had to stay far away from her to keep my people safe. In the stillness that followed, I made a terrible, cowardly choice. I let my internal flaw control my actions. I decided to reject the warmth because the cold felt so much safer. "Lock her away," I ordered, my voice sounding completely dead and emotionless as the ice began to creep back over my skin. "Take Nyla to the remote north tower immediately. No one is allowed to visit her." Magnus smiled a wide, evil smile and nodded his head. Without another word, he left the room to execute my cruel command. As soon as the doors closed, a heavy, suffocating silence roared in my ears. My chest ached with a deep, hollow emptiness. I had locked her away to protect myself, but deep down, I knew the truth, that I had just ruined the only good thing in my life. I stood all alone on the cold stone platform by the heavy throne. The wind blew through the room, matching my cold soul. I was a monster. I had thrown away my only chance at true happiness because I allowed a handful of ancient lies to fracture my sanity completely. The quiet darkness was a freezing, heavy blanket. I chose isolation over connection because my fear made me blind to her purity. My silver eyes stared blankly at the frost forming on my fingertips. There was no going back from this dark road now. The open loop of Magnus's true loyalty was still unresolved, and I was playing right into his hands. I closed my eyes tightly, listening to the distant sound of heavy iron chains locking her away far from me, knowing my choice had just set off a ticking bomb that would explode in the coming night. Chapter 13. That night, the heavy silence inside my dark castle was loud enough to drive a man insane. I couldn't sit on my high throne anymore because the memory of Nyla's warm touch was burning holes right through my cold skin. The bitter frost was growing thicker on my bedroom walls, but inside my chest I felt a terrible, empty void. Have you ever hurt the only person who actually cared about your broken soul? Because of that heavy guilt, my legs moved on instinct before I could even stop myself. I sprinted up the narrow, winding steps of the remote north tower, my heavy leather boots slamming against the hard stone. I didn't care if Magnus saw me. I didn't care if the whole court thought I was losing my mind. Moments later, I reached the heavy iron door of her prison cell and threw it open with a loud, echoing crash. Nyla was sitting on a cold stone bench, her small body curled up against the biting chill of the dark room. The moment their eyes locked, my chest gave a massive, painful thud. Her beautiful green eyes were red from crying, and her white nightgown was covered in gray dust. I felt like an absolute monster. I was a king with no crown, a warrior with no weapon, a man with no hope. Without thinking, my knees hit the hard stone floor right in front of her, and I dropped my regal head into my hands. "I am so sorry, Nyla," I choked out, my deep voice trembling in the quiet room. "I was so terrified of the heat you gave me because I have spent my whole life hiding in the dark, freezing ice." As the silence stretched, I reached out and gently touched the hem of her simple nightgown, completely refusing to hide my shaking fingers anymore. I confessed my deepest, darkest terrors to her because keeping her locked away was killing me faster than the curse ever could. I told her about how my father became a monster before he died, pushing everyone away until he turned to solid glass. I didn't want to be a frozen statue anymore. I wanted to be human again. In that moment, Nyla didn't pull away or scream at me for locking her up. Instead, she slowly reached down and placed her soft, warm hands right over my jagged facial scar. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, a beautiful wave of golden energy rushed straight into my frozen brain, wiping away every single ounce of my deep doubt. The cold walls around us didn't matter anymore because her forgiveness was the sweetest thing I had ever tasted. I stood up and pulled her close against my chest, locking myself into this dangerous new path of feeling. We walked out of that dark tower hand in hand, completely ready to face whatever terrible trap Magnus was setting for us in the shadows below. Chapter 14. Come morning, the bright winter sun was hitting the snow outside, but the real danger was hiding inside my private library. My royal guards had trapped a sneaky court spy trying to clear out the secret royal desks. The spy was shaking all over because he had a royal insignia hidden in his boot. As the truth unraveled, during our harsh questioning, I found out a horrifying secret that made my inner wolf growl in pure fury. The spy confessed that Regent Magnus was the one who violently ordered the death of Nyla's mother many years ago. To make things worse, the spy pulled a crumpled, yellowed piece of paper out of his pocket, the exact missing page from the prophecy book. I snatched the paper from his hand, my silver eyes scanning the ancient black ink as Nyla leaned against my shoulder. As the bond pulsed between us, the words on the page seemed to glow with a strange, magical light. The ancient prophecy clearly stated that the Alpha King must completely surrender all his royal ice magic to his fated mate to break the curse forever. My breath caught in my throat because breaking the curse meant losing my absolute control and becoming completely vulnerable to her power. What would you do if saving your life meant giving up every single bit of the power that keeps you safe? I remembered a sad story from my childhood about my mother's family line. She had a sister who tried to share her magical power with a mate, but the magic was too heavy, and it ended up tearing both of their minds apart. It was a terrifying risk. Still, I looked over at Nyla's brave face, and my protective instincts flared up hotter than a blazing fire. I felt a wave of righteous fury aimed right at Magnus because he had kept us in the dark just to steal my throne. He wanted me to freeze so he could rule the kingdom with an iron fist. Without another word, I crushed the spy's magical crystal under my heavy boot, turning it into useless purple dust. "We are going to the sacred caverns right now, Nyla," I announced, my voice sounding deep and completely steady. "We must bind our souls before Magnus can mobilize his treasonous army against us." She nodded her head quickly, her fingers tightly gripping the rusted iron key around her neck. That key wasn't just an old trinket. It was the exact tool we needed to unlock the ancient altar deep beneath the castle. We ran through the secret stone passages, knowing the regent's spies were already running to tell their master about our sudden move. Chapter 15. From there, we finally reached the sacred icy caverns deep beneath the foundations of the castle. The massive cave was filled with giant, glowing white crystals that lit up the dark space like 1,000 stars under the earth. The air thickened, with the primal power of the old gods, making my inner wolf stir with anticipation. In the center of the room stood the ancient stone altar, covered in deep carvings that matched Nyla's rusted key perfectly. As if fate demanded it, Nyla stepped forward and slotted the iron key into the center of the stone. Time stood still, as a giant rumble shook the cavern floor. The altar split open, revealing a beautiful pool of liquid golden magic that smelled like fresh pine and summer rain. I stepped up beside her, took a deep breath, and lowered every single one of my protective emotional walls. I gave her my magic. I gave her my heart. I gave her my entire life. Between one breath and the next, I grabbed both of her hands and plunged them directly into the golden pool with mine. And just like that, everything changed. A massive, blinding explosion of silver and gold light shot up from the altar, wrapping around our bodies like a warm blanket of wildfire. The thick ice inside my veins didn't just melt, it turned into pure, flowing energy that bound itself directly to Nyla's soul. I let out a loud roar as the ancient bond snapped into place, branding my skin with the invisible mark of true partnership. No more fear. No more walls. No more winter. We were finally connected because our souls were stitched together by fate. Have you ever felt a connection so strong it completely rewrites who you are inside? Without warning, a loud, explosive boom echoed through the sacred cavern. The heavy stone doors of the cave shattered into 1,000,000 flying pieces, filling the air with blinding gray dust. Regent Magnus stood in the ruined doorway, his face twisted into an ugly snarl, as a dozen treasonous guards drew their silver swords behind him. With a single glance, I saw the dark fire magic crackling around his fingers, and I knew he came to kill us both. The beautiful bonding light around us started to flicker dangerously. I pulled Nyla behind my back, my silver eyes flashing with a wild, feral intensity as the traitorous army rushed forward to destroy our new future. Chapter 16. Magnus raised his hands and, without warning, a blinding flash of purple fire blasted right across the ancient stone cavern. The air smelled instantly like rotten eggs and burning copper. My inner wolf roared out in pure terror. Because of that, our newly formed soul bond flared with an agonizing white-hot heat that nearly brought me to my knees. "You are too late, boy," Magnus screamed out, his voice echoing wildly off the shaking cave walls. He threw a dark, twisted stone artifact directly into the golden pool of magic. Just like that, the beautiful golden light turned a sickening shade of pitch black. I tried to pull Nyla back behind my iron chest, but the dark magic grabbed onto my freezing ice powers like a hungry parasitic leech. It twisted my magic around, it corrupted my strength, it turned my own winter into a lethal weapon. To make things worse, the severed bond whipped through my veins like boiling acid. The physical pain was absolutely blinding. I gasped for air, but my lungs felt like they were filling up with sharp, jagged glass. In that moment, Magnus directed the black, corrupted ice straight toward Nyla's fragile body. My thoughts spun out of control. Have you ever watched a terrifying nightmare come alive right in front of your face, completely unable to stop it? Before I could move, I forced my tearing muscles to fight against the dark spell. I tried to swallow the black magic back into my own chest. I tried to take the brutal blow myself. I tried to save her. But the dark energy was too heavy, and it ripped right through my physical defenses. Between one breath and the next, a massive, jagged spike of dark, unholy ice shot across the cavern floor. It struck Nyla right in the chest. Her breath caught, and a terrible, choked gasp left her lips as the dark frost climbed up her pale legs like a swarm of freezing spiders. "Orion," she whispered out. Her green eyes filled with a heartbreaking look of absolute betrayal as the ice reached her neck. She thought I did this to her. As the silence roared in my ears, the dark ice completely encased her small body, turning her into a silent, frozen statue of black glass. Her beautiful golden aura died instantly. Because of that sudden loss, the world went completely dark inside my mind, leading me straight into a pit of pure, unadulterated madness. Chapter 17. What followed was a silence so loud it shattered the remaining pieces of my broken sanity. I fell down onto my hands and knees in the gray dust, staring blankly at the black block of ice holding Nyla captive. She was completely motionless. Her beautiful green eyes were staring out through the dark glass, frozen forever in a permanent look of terror. She was dead. I killed her. My own corrupted power had destroyed the only light I ever had in this world. Because of that crushing realization, something inside my mind went completely snap. A wild, feral scream ripped out of my throat, sounding less like a powerful king and more like a dying, wounded monster. In the quiet that followed, my wild magic went totally out of control. I didn't even try to hold the creeping winter back anymore. I wanted it to take me. I wanted to freeze. I wanted to disappear. I remembered an old story about a crazed alpha from the eastern wastes who accidentally killed his fated mate during a full moon frenzy. He went completely rabid, tore his own castle down, and let the frost bury him alive. Because the guilt was just too heavy to carry. Now, I finally understood his terrible choice. Without another word, an absolute blizzard of blue-black ice exploded outward from my chest in a giant, roaring wave. It raced up the stone stairs, freezing everything in its path. It blasted into the grand throne room, turning the high ceilings and the long wooden tables into jagged, dead glaciers. Moments later, the freezing wave turned right back on me. The ice climbed up my heavy leather boots, wrapping around my legs like heavy iron chains. I didn't even try to fight it. Instead, I welcomed the biting cold with open arms. By the time the dark ice reached my chest, I saw Magnus step over the frozen bodies of his own guards. A wicked, greedy laugh shook his chest as he reached down and picked up my fallen golden crown from the frozen floor. "The kingdom is finally mine," he hissed out, his face twisted into a mask of pure triumph. I didn't even care anymore. The cold moved up my neck, turning my beating heart into a solid lump of dead stone. My silver eyes went completely blank. I was locked inside a giant, impenetrable glacier of my own making, completely cut off from the living world while my broken soul drifted down into a deep, endless nightmare under the snow. Chapter 18. That night my consciousness drifted through a completely empty, pitch-black void inside my frozen prison. I woke up, or rather, my dreaming mind woke up, standing all alone in a massive, desolate wasteland of white snow that reached out forever under a dark sky. The wind was howling like 1,000 dying wolves, tearing at my spiritual body. Not only that, the terrifying ghosts of my past began to step out of the swirling blizzard. I saw my father looking at me with cold, disappointed eyes. I saw my mother crying heavy tears of solid ice. I saw a phantom version of Nyla, her chest pierced by my own jagged ice spike. "You destroy everything you touch, Orion," the phantom Nyla whispered out, her voice sounding like grinding glaciers in the dark. "You are just a cursed monster." I dropped down onto the freezing snow, my hands clutching my head as the mocking voices echoed inside my brain. They were right. I was a danger to everyone. I was a failure as a king. I was a failure as a fated mate. Have you ever wanted to just lie down in the dark snow and let the freezing cold win completely? As the silence roared around me, I gave up all my remaining will to fight. I closed my eyes and let the spiritual snow bury my body, because I believed I didn't deserve to breathe the warm air ever again. But then, Just as the darkness was about to swallow my mind whole, a sudden sharp sensation cut right through the numbness. The jagged scar over my left eyebrow began to tingle with a strange, intense heat. As if fire bloomed beneath my skin, a tiny single golden ember flared to life right against my pale forehead. It was so small, yet it burned with the distinct sweet scent of wild honey and fresh summer rain. It was Nyla's magic. I felt it, clear as day. She was still alive inside her own frozen cage, and her stubborn soul was actively reaching out across the dark void to find me. My world tilted as the beautiful warmth touched my dying heart. I wasn't alone. She was still fighting for us. As though fate whispered. Anew commanded to my ears, my inner wolf opened his silver eyes and let out a ferocious primal roar that shook the entire dreamscape to its absolute foundations. Chapter 19. Love isn't a soft thing. It's a wildfire that shatters mountains. Inside my frozen prison, my heart was nothing but dead, heavy stone. But then, that tiny golden ember from our bond flared bright against my scarred eyebrow. It tasted like sweet honey. It felt like hot rain. As the bond pulsed, a heavy wave of pure truth washed over my mind. Nyla was not dead. The black ice did not kill her, because her mother's ancient magic had formed a protective shield around her heart right before the impact. She felt it, clear as day, and now she was calling out to me from inside her own dark cage. Have you ever felt a sudden spark of hope that makes your entire soul scream? It was a crazy, beautiful feeling that tore through my dark thoughts. I could hear her breathing through the magical connection. I could feel her small hands scratching at the cold, dark void. I could feel the steady beat of her warm heart. In that moment, a crazy surge of raw, untamed fury exploded inside my chest. I had spent my whole life hiding behind giant ice walls because I was terrified of destroying the people I loved. I thought the cold was my safety. I thought isolation was my crown. I thought numbness was my shield. That was all a lie. My fear hadn't protected Nyla. My fear had almost gotten her killed by the Regent's dark magic. And just like that, everything changed. I didn't want the quiet safety of the dark anymore. I wanted the burning pain of life. I wanted to fight for my fated mate. Between one breath and the next, my inner wolf woke up completely, snapping his giant jaws and roaring like absolute thunder inside my head. The sound shook my bones. The sound broke my fear. The sound brought me back to life. In the stillness that followed, the massive glacier encasing my body began to shake violently. Cracks ran up the blue ice like jagged lightning bolts. The stone floor beneath my feet groaned under the sudden shift. Time stood still, as a blinding golden silver light erupted straight from my chest, melting the dark corruption away. I forced my muscles to move, I forced my lungs to expand, I forced the ice to break. With a loud, deafening boom, the entire glacier shattered into a million tiny pieces. I stood tall in the ruined cavern, gasping for the warm air as my silver eyes blazed with a new starlight intensity. The ice was gone from my veins, leaving only pure fluid power that hummed with Nyla's golden energy. I didn't feel cold anymore. I felt alive. I felt dangerous. I looked over at the black block of ice holding my girl, knowing I had to smash her prison next to bring her back into the light. Chapter 20. From there, I rushed over to Nyla's dark prison with a wild, desperate hunger in my soul. The black ice holding her was thick and ugly, smelling like Magnus's foul wizardry and dark poison. Without warning, I placed both of my bare hands flat against the dark glass. I didn't use cold magic this time. Instead, I channeled the raw, human love inside my heart straight into the frost. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, or rather, beneath the frozen surface, the dark ice began to hiss and steam like water on a hot stove. Do you know what it feels like to finally hold the person who holds your entire world in her hands? The black glass cracked open with a sharp snap. In the span of a breath, Nyla fell forward right into my waiting arms, gasping for air as the golden aura flared back to life around her body. Without thinking, I pulled her tight against my chest, burying my face in her soft hair. She was shaking all over, but her skin felt like pure summer sun against my face. "Orion," she whispered, her green eyes opening wide as she looked at my face. The moment their eyes locked, our eyes locked, I knew we were completely unbroken. Her heart skipped, a heavy beat against my ribs, and I could feel her soul answering mine through our repaired bond. I told her a quick story about how my father never got this chance, because he let his fear lock him in the dark forever. He died alone. He died cold. He died broken. I would not repeat his tragedy. I was going to fight for our future right now. The air thickened, with the heavy scent of wild pine and burning magic as we stood up together on the ruined stone floor. We needed a fast plan to stop Magnus before he could run away with my royal crown. Nyla reached down and grabbed the rusted iron key from the broken altar, her fingers gripping the metal tight. "The key can reverse the dark fire magic," she said, her voice sounding brave and clear. "But you have to trust your power entirely, Orion." I looked at my hands, realizing I wasn't afraid of my wild magic anymore, because her love was the anchor that kept me sane. We had no army, we had no guards, and we had no shields. Yet, we had each other, and that was more than enough to tear Magnus's kingdom down as we marched side by side toward the heavy doors of the grand throne room. Chapter 21. Soon after, our heavy footsteps echoed like war drums through the long, dark corridors of the castle. Every single wall was covered in my old dead frost, but where Nyla walked, the stones began to thaw and stream with clear water. It was beautiful. Without another word, a group of 6 treasonous guards jumped out from the shadows, their silver swords catching the dim torchlight. They smelled like fear and betrayal. As if summoned, they lunged forward to cut us down. I didn't run. I didn't hide behind a frozen wall. I didn't leave her side. Rather, I stepped in front of Nyla and let my inner wolf take complete control of my body. Moments later, I unleashed my new magic in a beautiful fluid wave of silver gold light. It wasn't the jagged, biting ice of my curse anymore. It was smooth, fast, and completely controlled. I swept my arm across the air, and a blast of freezing wind knocked the weapons right out of the guards' hands, pinning them harmlessly to the stone walls with soft bands of clear frost. I didn't kill them, because a true, good king protects his people instead of slaughtering them in anger. They looked at my glowing silver eyes in total shock, realizing the frozen monster they feared had finally become a true sovereign. Her instincts surged beside me as Nyla used her golden magic to shatter the dark purple crystals Magnus had hidden in the torches to drain our power. As the wind shifted through the broken windows, the foul smell of Magnus's dark magic grew stronger and stronger. We reached the giant oak doors of the grand throne room. I could hear the regent inside shouting at the remaining lords and demanding they swear a blood oath to his new flag. He thought he had already won the war. With a single glance at Nyla, I saw the fierce determination burning in her green eyes, and I knew she was ready for the end. I reached out my heavy hand and gripped the cold brass handle of the door. The final open loop of our destiny was waiting right on the other side of this wood. I slammed my boot hard against the frame, throwing the heavy doors open with a thunderous crash that shook the entire castle, stepping right into the blinding light of our ultimate showdown. Chapter 22. The heavy oak doors hit the stone walls with a sound like roaring thunder, and just like that the entire room froze. Regent Magnus stood at the top of the throne platform, my golden crown gripped tightly in his trembling hands. A dozen council lords gasped in pure terror, scrambling backward like rats trapped in a burning barn. Because of that sudden entrance, Magnus's face twisted from absolute triumph into a mask of pure, ugly rage. "Imposters! Monsters!" he screamed, his smooth voice cracking under the weight of his panic. "Guards, cut them down! They have brought dark witchcraft into our sacred court." But not a single guard moved. They stood completely paralyzed, staring at my glowing silver eyes and the brilliant golden light radiating from Nyla's skin. Without warning, Magnus dropped the crown and smashed his hands together, unleashing a massive, roaring tidal wave of pitch-black fire straight toward us. The foul stench of burning copper and dark poison filled the air instantly. To make things worse, the dark spell began to rip the residual cold from the stones, turning the very air into jagged, poisonous shards of black glass. Have you ever stood in the path of a storm, knowing that running away meant losing everything you ever loved? In that moment, I didn't shrink back. I didn't hide behind an iron shield. I gripped Nyla's warm hand even tighter, matching her steps as we walked directly into the blinding blast. As the bond pulsed between us, our unified magic flared out like a massive protective dome of silver-gold fire. Magnus's dark spell crashed against our shield and shattered into harmless gray dust. Beneath the moonlight, streaming through the high stained glass windows, my black beard was frosted with light, and the jagged scar over my left eyebrow throbbed with a beautiful healing heat. I looked at Nyla, and the moment our eyes locked, I knew the final battle had begun. She reached into her cloak and pulled out the rusted iron key, its ancient dragon carvings glowing with a brilliant, blinding intensity. We didn't need 1,000 soldiers. We didn't need a massive army. We were a unified front, and the tyrant's reign of terror was officially coming to a violent end. Chapter 23. Next, Magnus backed away until his spine hit the frozen high throne, his dark eyes wide with the realization that his stolen power was failing him completely. "This is my kingdom," he shrieked, drawing a twisted silver dagger from his belt. "You are a cursed monster, Orion. You will freeze this world to ashes." In the stillness that followed, the ancient words of the missing prophecy page flashed clearly inside my mind. To break the curse forever, the Alpha King must completely surrender all his royal ice magic to his fated mate. It meant giving up my absolute control. It meant becoming completely vulnerable. It meant trusting her with my very life. Without another word, I closed my eyes and let go of every single wall inside my soul. I gave up the cold logic. I gave up the frozen armor. I gave up the winter. I poured every ounce of my ancient, icy magic straight through our joined hands and into Nyla's body. And just like that, everything changed. Nyla let out a powerful, breathless gasp as my silver frost merged perfectly with her golden summer aura. She raised the rusted iron key toward the ceiling, channeling our combined, limitless power into a single, blinding beam of starlight. Before the words left her lips, a massive shockwave of pure, golden-silver light exploded outward from the key, filling every square inch of the grand throne room. The dark corruption inside the castle didn't just fade, it was violently incinerated. The black fire magic inside Magnus's hands turned back against him, wrapping around his arms like heavy iron chains and trapping him in a permanent, motionless block of clear, harmless ice. He was defeated by his own greed. Moments later, the heavy, suffocating silence in the room broke as the council lords fell to their knees, bowing their heads in absolute reverence to their true king and queen. The open loop of my family's ancient curse was shattered into 1,000 harmless pieces, leaving us standing together in the brilliant dawn. Chapter 24. From there, the great winter that had gripped the Frostbane citadel for 300 long years finally began to break. I stood on the high royal balcony, my arm wrapped tightly around Nyla's waist as we watched the morning sun rise over our kingdom. As the sky lightened, the massive glaciers on the mountain peaks began to melt into clear, rushing rivers of fresh water. Down in the valley, the dead, frozen soil softened into rich black earth, and millions of green leaves and colorful wildflowers burst through the retreating snow like a beautiful living carpet. Spring had finally come to the winter court. Truth be told, my hands were completely warm now, the biting frost gone from my veins forever. I looked down at the heavy gold crown resting on Nyla's beautiful hair, and then at the matching silver band on my own brow. We had rewritten our destiny. We had turned a tragic curse into a beautiful, unbreakable bond of true partnership. "We did it, Orion," Nyla whispered softly, leaning her head against my shoulder as the sweet scent of wild honey and fresh rain drifted on the warm morning breeze. "Together," I murmured, my deep voice filled with a profound emotion I was no longer terrified to show. "Forever." Eventually, the loud, joyous cheers of our people echoed up from the crowded courtyard down below. They were no longer whispering about a terrifying ice monster who never smiled. They were celebrating a true king who had found his light in the dark. I looked at the jagged scar on my reflection in the glass, no longer seeing a mark of pain, but a proud reminder of the battle we won. The long, lonely winter was officially over. As the sun warmed our faces and the bright green valley stretched out before us, I knew that our new kingdom would flourish for generations to come, born from the ashes of the cold and bound forever by the eternal heat of our fated love. The end